Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the joint Federal State Task Force on Electric Transmission established by FERC in docket number AD 21-15. My name is Liz Salerno, and I work on transmission and technology initiatives for Chairman Glick at FERC. I will be co-facilitating today's task force meeting alongside Jennifer Murphy, who is the Director of Energy Policy and Senior Counsel with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or NARUC. This is the time and place that has been noticed for the first meeting of the Joint Federal State Task Force on Electric Transmission to consider the matters that have been posted in the agenda issued on October 27th in docket AD 21-15. This meeting is on the record, and a transcript will be placed into the docket. The public can listen and observe in the room as well as online. Any comments by stakeholders can be submitted into the docket anytime through FERC's e-filing system. Please visit our website. Finally, today's discussion will avoid the merits of any pending contested matters, and FERC's General Counsel, Matthew Christensen, joins us and will interrupt discussions if we enter that territory. I will now turn this over to the task force co-chairs, FERC Chairman Rich Glick and Maryland Public Service Commission Chair Jason Stanek, for opening remarks. Over to you, Chairman Glick.
Thank you very much, Liz. A little too close here. First of all, I want to start out by thanking all of the state commissioners and all of my colleagues at FERC for participating in this task force. I think it's a very important endeavor and appreciate you willing to take your time to participate. But I also wanted to thank some other folks as well, just to start out. And first of all, wanted to thank former NARUC president now, Paul Shalander, for, we sat down, I'd say, earlier this year, and we talked a lot about how FERC and NARUC can work better together. And one of the things we talked about was how we can work better on the issues of transmission, and we came up with this idea for this task force, and I think that was a great idea, and I'm really looking forward to participating. But I want to thank again President Shalander for helping to come up with the idea. But I also want to thank the other folks at NARUC as well. Certainly Greg White, Jennifer Murphy, Michelle Malloy, and the rest of the NARUC team. The NARUC team has been very helpful in putting this all together. I also want to thank Liz Salerno, who's our lead on transmission and technology initiatives at FERC, for also doing a great job in putting this all together. And then finally, I had a chance to meet this morning with the new NARUC president, Judge Yagman, and from Virginia, and we had a good discussion, and really appreciate her support for this task force as well. I think everyone in this room, everyone knows why we're here, that we're in the midst of an enormous transition that's underway with regard to the electric sector. And one of the things that we know, I think around the country, is that we know there's going to be a significant additional demand for additional investment in electric transmission. And there are a number of things pushing that need, certainly state policy, consumer demand, weather issues needed to make the grid more resilient, but also issues related to climate change and the need to access remotely located cleaner energy resources. And that's pressing us in a number of different ways, and we need to think through how we address some of the barriers. And some of those barriers related to transmission investment are issues that arguably come within the FERC's jurisdiction, but some of them also come within the state's jurisdiction. And I've said this a million times, but there's no need to look at this as solely a FERC issue or solely a state issue. We need to work together on this issue. I think it's very important for the public interest, for the interest of our country, that we put aside some of our jurisdictional differences at times and see if we can work together. From my perspective, I'm looking at this as an opportunity to have a significant amount of input from state commissioners, both here and through other processes, but especially from this task force, in terms of how we're going to proceed in terms of our rulemakings. We have several initiatives underway related to transmission issues, and I think it's very important. And I view this process, this task force process, as very important to providing us input that hopefully will come out at the end of the day in terms of regulatory language and regulatory initiatives aimed at improving the role that states play in some of our transmission issues, like planning, like we're going to talk about today, and cost allocation, and so on. And I also see it as similarly an opportunity for the state commissions to hopefully take home the things we discussed today, but the things we'll be discussing in the future as well, and take home to your various states in terms of the initiatives that are underway in your various jurisdictions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Chairman Stanek from Maryland, to get us started also with some opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see everybody, and I want to echo these comments of thanks for all the people who made the logistics of today's meeting possible. About an hour and a half ago, at the concluding session of NARUC, I remarked how unique and important today is in terms of regulatory history. Some may recall back earlier this year in January, a group of 10 state chairs, some of whom are at this table, wrote an open letter to FERC calling for more opportunity to create a dialogue, create a relationship on state, federal electricity issues. In that letter, we did emphasize that communication between these regulatory bodies are important, and they could be facilitated by, quote, forums for state and federal regulators to discuss matters of common interest and to provide clarity and define expectations in advancing policy objectives. Well, we are fortunate today that in a mere short 10 months, FERC heeded that call, and it has become a reality. So I'd like to join Chair Glick in inaugurating this task force here today. Today's meeting, while staged somewhat like a technical conference, should not be viewed that way. Instead, the meeting reflects a cross-section of some very highly motivated state and federal commissioners sitting at this large table, working together to find issues and common solutions for this very difficult problem. Amongst the discussions with our state colleagues, we've been looking at the landscape, what works well, and what could possibly be improved upon over the course of the next 3 years during which this task force has been authorized. So as co-chair, I'm thankful for all of your willingness here at the table to contribute your time and resources to participate. I think the different perspectives that we all bring as both state and federal regulators will help to add to the conversation and find areas of common ground. So pursuant to FERC's order of June 17th, we were chartered specifically to address the issues relating to electric transmission. And our discussion today will focus specifically on how state perspectives are incorporated into the various regional transmission planning processes, as well as what steps could be taken to further enhance and reflect our policies in this very changing environment. I would like to thank all those parties who filed in docket number AD 2115 with respect to agenda topics to discuss today. I can tell you that when I began my career at FERC more than 20 years ago now, some of these very same issues of cost allocation, generator queue reform, cost containment were being discussed actively on the 11th floor at FERC. And of course, numerous rulemakings and landmark decisions have been made and initiated in that time. And I'm not just talking about Order 890 and Order 1000, but the dozens, if not hundreds, of small changes that have been made to transmission planning in various case-specific orders over the years, in both in the bilateral markets as well as the RTO markets. As we know, it's been more than a decade since the last major reform took place, and our industry is clearly struggling to address the latest challenges associated with building new transmission infrastructure. So what's changed in the past 10 years? Well, we know that the system is evolving quickly. The new demands on the grid are ever changing, as well as the technology that supports the grid. We've seen load change as well in different regions. Some have gone up, some have gone down. And of course, the generation portfolio mix is getting greener every day, whether that be dependent on state policies, federal policies, commitments to new clean energy goals, or as I said this morning, changing consumer preferences and a recognition of some of the issues that our country is facing. So the work that this group will do over the next 3 years will certainly be challenging. This is really the first time that Section 209 has been invoked in this manner, and we have an opportunity, as the 14 of us, I believe, to set a relatively high bar. And while I do not expect us to land on any definitive solutions by 6 p.m. this evening, I am looking forward to the initiation of this dialogue and listening intently to what all the members around this table have to say. I've been around for a while, and I know now most of you personally, and I'm confident that this forum will help build some solutions and hopefully be a model of cooperation. Word sort of cooperative federalism, but that's what we'll be able to resolve some of those differences. And today is that first step. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Glick and Chairman Stanek, for those opening remarks. Next on the agenda is the review and adoption of procedures for our meeting. I will turn that over to Chairman Glick to walk through that, and then we will turn next after that to introductions. Over to you, Chairman Glick.
Thank you, Liz. And I'm just going to take 30 seconds. We're going to use the system I think everyone is very familiar with. Everyone has a placard, so if everyone wants to speak, there'll be an opportunity first for opening statements, but after that, during the discussion portion of today's agenda, if anyone wants to speak, just feel free to put your placard up and you'll be called on in order. For everything else, we're going to use Robert's Rules of Order. I think we're prepared to the extent we need to do that. We may not today, but that's going to be the procedural rules we'll be working under, and our General Counsel, Matt Christensen, will be sure to advise us on what the rules require to the extent we have an issue that comes up. But with that, I know we're going to start with the opening statements. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair, Chair Stanek, to get us started on that.
Thank you. What we'll do at this point is we will go around the table, introduce the remaining 12 members of the task force, including Commissioner Rechlhaven in California today. Each member will have approximately 5 minutes to give opening introductory remarks. We'll start to my left with Chairman Andrew French of the Kansas Corporation Commission.
Thank you, Chair Stanek and Chairman Glick. As I said, I'm Andrew French, Chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission, and I do want to say I'm really pleased that Kansas is invited to be a part of this dialogue. Kansas is on the leading edge of renewable energy adoption and, of course, the complicated transmission issues that accompany that. Now, I think one piece of perspective and something that's really different between Kansas and other regions, perhaps, is that our movement in this direction was not necessarily related to state goals, policy goals. We do have a state renewable energy policy goal. We met that years ago. But really what we have found is the fact that Kansas sits on really optimal renewable energy resources, very low cost resources. Once you plan a system to hook those up and you have a market that dispatches on least cost, you naturally move to that direction and you take advantage from a cost standpoint and an economic standpoint of those resources. But because we're on that leading edge, I would say we are the first to see the benefits and the challenges. So as I said, these are really low cost energy resources. So Kansas and the Southwest Power Pool have some of, if not the lowest, wholesale energy prices throughout the entire nation. But as an accompaniment to that, we do also commonly experience widespread negative energy prices, which is not necessarily a healthy thing or a good price signal to be sending to the capacity that we need for reliability in our region. And so to the extent that those resources remain constrained within our region, there is a drawback of these negative prices. We also have experienced some of the early cost allocation issues associated with remote resources. I like to view Kansas as a microcosm of the entire nation, that we have extremely resource-rich areas in the West for wind and solar, but the load in Kansas tends to be on the far eastern side of the state and in a different pricing zone. And so there is a challenge associated with the fact that you have to make sure that to the extent you're developing energy resources and transporting those energy resources, the costs of that do not fall on customers who happen to reside in a renewable-rich area simply because they reside there when they don't actually use the energy. But I think it's important to remember that there are solutions to these problems. And that's my goal for the task force, is that we will have some really serious, constructive conversations about the most optimal, least cost, and most reliable way to meet the enormous growing demand for renewable energy. And we will, I'm sure, get into this in today's meeting and in later meetings, but the benefits of these initiatives are uneven throughout the nation. Many benefits will flow to large load centers. Kansas is not a large load center or a growing load center, but we do want to be a partner to help meet demand for renewable energy resources, and I hope that this task force is the right forum to have that conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Gladys Brown-Dutrell of the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission.
Good afternoon, Chairman Glick, and to the FERC commissioners and to my colleagues in NARUC on this transmission task force. I am Gladys Brown-Dutrell, serving as the chair for the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. It is truly an honor to have been chosen to serve on this task force, and I found it very interesting in just learning all the things from my different colleagues as we were preparing for this first meeting. We each have a unique story to tell, which is important to the entire process, which also was one of my reasons why making sure that Pennsylvania, or at least someone from Pennsylvania, submitted their name to be on this task force. I think I said in an earlier session that in telling our own story, we wanted to make sure that we were able to tell that story, but also make sure that there's the understanding of the complexities in the entire story. So with us as a state, we are very diverse geographically, and in that, we're also very diverse in terms of our policy issues. Also politically very diverse, which has all those different challenges to be able to put together and balance all of that out. As a state, we are an exporter of generation, something that I don't think when I served as legal counsel in the General Assembly starting back in 1991 that I ever thought we would see. But we have over the years because of the fact of the drilling for natural gas. And with that, we also know that natural gas is part of our story in terms of reducing our carbon emission. So that is part of our story that we need to continue to tell everyone. But also we recognize the states around us have different policy issues, and we are very respectful of those policy issues. And it's important to be able to not only acknowledge their policy concerns and initiatives and recognize in what they want to do, but we need to be part of that discussion because it's going to take all of us in terms of the transmission grid. We realize that there needs to be some changes to the transmission grid, to the policies. We realize that as we have seen over the decades, the changes in the weather events that we have been seeing, we have been right in the middle of all that as well. So we understand the significance of that. But in that, we need to be part of that entire discussion because we also understand as the Keystone State, we're also right in the middle of that as well in terms of transmission and making sure that the grid is secure and upgraded and providing the needed energy to everyone, but also making sure that it's an appropriate in terms of cost allocation and making sure the cost is not burdensome to our consumers, especially those that may not be direct beneficiaries of it. So I thought it was important to be part of this task force. As I stated in some of the things you see, the concerns for us is making sure not only that there are upgrades to the transmission grid, but also that it's appropriate in terms of the cost allocation. We've made sure that over the years, we've participated in different proceedings, whether it's through our RTO or through OPSI as well, but also making sure that we acknowledge that we are a state that is very much interested in the competitive wholesale market, interested in making sure that the market dictates things, but also making sure that consumers are not overly burdensome because with that, making sure that we keep true to our state policies as well. So I just wanted to mention that and thank everyone for participating in this task force.
Thank you. FERC Commissioner James Danley.
Thank you very much. My comments are going to be very brief here. I just want to offer a framing device for people to keep in the back of their minds. I've been gratified by the amount of participation of the states in quite a few of our dockets, actually, and I've been encouraging it at every opportunity because, as I've repeatedly said, the states have a far better understanding of the nitty-gritty of what's going on than we do. And that cooperation is important, but I think it's worth noting for everybody, and should keep in mind the fact that when it comes to something like transmission, if the Commission, that is to say at FERC, has lofty ambitions and wants to implement aggressive policies to incentivize this or that activity, it is not the states that need our cooperation, but rather FERC requires the states' cooperation because ultimately the states wield veto power over any particular transmission activity. So it's worth just keeping in mind what the jurisdictional division is, and I understand that the subject of jurisdiction is always going to cause a little bit of friction. I simply want to point that out as we go ahead. So thank you very much.
Chairman Dan Scripps of the Michigan Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Stanek, and thank you, Chairman Glick, for your leadership in organizing this. And I'll apologize in advance because a lot of folks have heard this about an hour ago, but in the interest of sharing it with the broader audience, I'm excited to be a part of this in some ways because I think Michigan represents a lot of the issues and is a microcosm and a sort of test lab for a lot of the issues that I think we're going to be wrestling with as part of this task force. About 20 years ago, we restructured our market, and then in 2008, 90% of load was returned to the utilities, but we still have 10% operating as a retail open access choice market. And so we've got experience with both sort of the vertically integrated model and the competitive choice model, and have lessons, I think, that we in Michigan can draw from our experience in both places. At the same time, 20 years ago, we spun off the transmission system, which now operates as independent companies. This means that instead of optimizing within a corporate structure, trading off between generation and transmission and distribution sort of within a single utility, there are different entities, and of course, as Commissioner Danley pointed out, different sort of jurisdictional pieces to the generation and the transmission, and then again to the load-serving entities operating the distribution grid. And that allows for some interesting dynamics, I'll say, but also gives us, I think, a unique perspective on how to optimize sort of for the state's benefit and for our customers' benefit with different entities playing different roles. We are, of course, part of two different RTOs, most of the state in MISO in two different zones, and then the part in the southwest of the Lower Peninsula operating within PJM. And so understanding sort of how SEAMs work, the benefits of both, and then lessons that may have broader application from two different experiences in the RTO setting, I think can be valuable. We are, of course, a peninsular state. Our state motto is, "If you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you." And that is great for all sorts of reasons, but from a transmission perspective, offers some challenges. And we've been working with MISO over the last couple of years on examining sort of the import and export limits and how we might better integrate Michigan into the broader MISO region. And I think there are lessons from that experience and also the challenges of maintaining reliability as a peninsular state in terms of the amount of resources needed locally that we can offer as part of this discussion. We also are costs in terms of manufacturing within a global and others pursue the electrification of automobiles, and the increased load and the increased requirements on the transmission system ultimately in terms of electrifying potentially a whole additional sector of the US economy. So we I think see that issue from both perspectives. And then finally, we've seen a significant change in our generation fleet, but as Chairman French, apologies, pointed out, it's not necessarily driven at this point by public policy objectives. We had an RPS in 2008, modest, 10% by 2015. It was expanded by the legislature to 15% by 2021. But what's really driving renewable integration at this point is a planning process, an integrated resource planning process that requires us to balance issues like reliability, cost, diversification of generation supply, and others in order to find the optimum, the most reasonable and prudent balance of energy and capacity that for up to 15 years in the future. And I think something that's driven by cost, consumer preference, and a planning process as opposed to public policy has interesting ramifications when we talk about assigning costs for the transmission system in order to meet the public policy objectives of states. And then finally, just in terms of my framing device, we like hockey in Michigan. We're the home of the Red Wings and a cold northern state. And one of my favorite quotes that I think is applicable here comes from Wayne Gretzky. You don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going. We've seen over the last couple of years in terms of wildfires and ice storms and other events that we've got real challenges on our transmission system today. But when you think about the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather combined with an ongoing and indeed increasing transformation of our generation fleet, we need to think about what transmission is going to be needed and where we need to skate as a country and as regions and as states. And so I think there are a lot of different perspectives on that here. I think we're going to benefit from the diversity of views. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thank you. Next, we have the chairman of the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, Matt Nelson.
Good afternoon. Whoa, a little loud. I'm honored and excited to be part of the task force. Massachusetts and New England appreciate being part of this process because we really want to work with our regional and federal partners on achieving a holistic approach to building transmission and to meet our collective goals. To cut right to the point of what I think the most value of the task force is going to bring, I really think that we have an opportunity here to promote the kind of partnership between the states and FERC that could lead to a real process in developing a consumer-forward transmission projects. And from that, I think what we really want to do is identify things the states can do to help in that process and things that FERC can do to help the states in that process to develop that partnership further. So I think the states can really help by leading regionally on regional coordination on cost allocation, right? I think states' rights, and that came through in comments that we've made, that we always want to maintain that. I think we want to develop and participate in states to be active participants in the planning process for transmission, right? We need a seat at the table. And identifying and sharing data to develop the long-term information for the RTOs to use to base their studies on so they understand where states expect their load to go. I think that's a critical element the states can provide this process. For FERC, I think we want to ensure that FERC is there to help make sure that critical projects for regions, ones identified through a transparent planning process, are built. I think we want to require that regional RTOs have the resources and the aptitude to complete state transmission planning processes as well. I know in ISO New England, we are asking them to do a lot, and we want to make sure that they have the resources to meet this ever-growing need and the changing environment that we're going through. And finally, I think that if FERC was able to be a backstop when regional cost allocation cannot be reached, that would be helpful in achieving our goal of building more transmission. The major load centers of New England have extremely aggressive clean energy targets, and they're linked with all sorts of aspects of our economy that go outside the energy industry. We're trying to move our transportation sector and our building sector and onto the electric grid so that we can do that with renewable energy. The status quo of where we are now won't be acceptable with the load growth that we anticipate seeing. The ISO New England region does not currently have any congestion issues. We've been very successful in building reliability projects, and we're not seeing issues on cost allocation either. For example, for a public policy project, Massachusetts has gone it alone and offered to pay 100% of the costs of both the transmission and the long-term PPA that was signed. But even though those two things have gone well, we're still seeing these projects not being completed. And so the resource that we're really running out of in New England is time to achieve our goals. There are many factors contributing to the impediments of the transmission infrastructure. I think this task force can help address major impediments, and the NOPR explored those, the siloed approach to transmission. So in New England, I think, and I've heard from some other states earlier today and from Michigan, that line between public policy, economic, and reliability, they're starting to become blurred, right? When you're doing integrated resource planning, you're really, sometimes you're not breaking those categories as much. So we want to make sure that we're getting a good foundation for how we're planning. And I'm not sure that siloing those costs is necessarily the best way to do it. Our regional state committee, NESCO, on behalf of New England's, on behalf of the New England governors, also indicated through our vision statement to ISO New England that we wanted to improve our regional planning process. NESCO also has developed the concept of the One Transmission proposal, which integrates public policy planning into our reliability planning process. This task force should explore how we can work with the RTOs in our region, and it can take a lead in developing and implementing new planning procedures and cost allocation methods that will meet the moment in realizing our future power grid. FERC, of course, has a central role in this, and that's why we're really excited to be here. And I hope that it can serve as a critical backstop so that we can finalize the goals that we're trying to achieve.
Commissioner Kimberly Duffley of the North Carolina Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Glick. Thank you, Chair Stanek. It's an honor for me and North Carolina to be part of this task force representing the Southeast. So North Carolina is a leader in the energy transition that we've just heard about. We have had bipartisan legislation just passed where the Commission must prepare a carbon reduction plan by December 2022 with very aggressive goals. And I find North Carolina's in a very unique position for this task force in that our customers are served by 2 IOUs that are not within an RTO, as well as 1 IOU that is within an RTO, specifically PJM, as well as electric cooperatives and municipalities. And another factor that will provide some guidance is North Carolina is on the seam with an RTO PJM. So we have a non-RTO utility on the seam with utilities within an RTO. We've seen some transmission issues popping up there, and we'd like to discuss those issues further. So we are one of the states in the Southeast, and one of the few states in the Southeast that has 1 foot in an RTO as well as 1 foot outside of an RTO. So we'll be able to look at these transmission issues from both perspectives. The second reason that I personally applied to the task force is I have always been very interested in the federal-state jurisdictional divide and the unrelenting tensions that come with that division. And I believe that it will be the states and the federal government to try to work together and to solve these issues if we can, versus letting those issues go to the court, which kind of leads me to what I hope for the task force is really to provide clarity about our regional differences and to really speak to each other face to face and not just reading words on a cold page, so that everyone understands every region has some different issues. I know my participation, I was learning different issues with Massachusetts and Kansas, and that's been very helpful. And lastly, what I will say is, as a regulator and the regulators around this table, our ultimate goal is to provide safe, affordable, and reliable electricity to our consumers and our customers. And during this energy transition, we really need to figure out what is the most efficient way possible to enable this transition. Thank you.
Commissioner Christine Raper of the Idaho Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, Chair Stanek. Thank you, Chairman Glick. I have the honor of serving with past NARUC President Paul Schlander and Honorable Eric Anderson in Idaho, but I am happy to be representing the Western region in these talks. And as this goes forward, and I'm going to take my cue from Chair Glick. We had invited him several years ago to the Western Conference. We gave him 45 minutes and he took about 20. And he also has said multiple times in anticipation of this meeting that he didn't want it to be about speeches, he wanted to be about dialogue. So I'm going to be short and take about half the time given because I'd like to move on to the dialogue. But I do appreciate the opportunity. There clearly is no question of need. We spoke about this earlier. There's a need, and I'm not blind. While Idaho is not one of those policy-forward energy renewable resource states, right? We're not one of the ones in the front of that dialogue. We don't have an RPS standard in our state. I understand that the transition of the grid is occurring because of the resources that are being retired and the new resources that are being brought on, which are largely renewable resources. But I would implore the dialogue to remain around reliability, because I think when it really comes down to it, it is about reliability of the grid first. And no matter what the resources are that are being retired or that are being added to the system, reliability is the key, and it is the common ground that we all have, no matter what state you're from, no matter what your resource mix is. So we have a lot of diversity in the West. I actually, as an example of what this task force creation has already done, I have heard Chair Dutrell speak in the last many years any number of times, and she always has my attention because it's always very well thought out. It's always she always has a nugget of something that I can use, right, for my region and my state. And it wasn't until a personal conversation based on the makeup of what this task force is 2 days ago that I realized that Idaho is in fact a keystone state. And the reality is that she and I actually have a lot in common of where our states sit within our region, about how the states around us have very differing policies. We sort of sit in the middle regarding policy, regarding our position, regarding resources and resource mix. And I think that that's the best thing that this task force can do, right? It's to understand how those interactions work, to better understand how people do it in different regions, and to help us learn how we can better handle those things within our own region. That being said, I think the West is the wild, wild West in some ways, and all the states want to think that they've got their own thing going, and in a large part because we don't have an RTO outside of the CAISO that connects all the states. And we are, in fact, one grid. There is the Western interconnection. And everybody has to be willing to come to the table. Everybody has to be willing to give something, because the reality is that this transition is coming. The system needs to be able to function. There is a reliability issue at stake here for serving the customers of all of our states. And I think that the common ground is somewhere in between what I've heard Chairman Glick say and what I've heard Commissioner Danley say, and that is that we need to be able to anticipate transmission. And Commissioner Danley, I've heard several times just in the last several weeks say that there's a tipping point at which those costs are no longer a savings from the generation that you are not having to build in order to optimize those resources. And I really do believe that there is a middle ground there that we can reach, which keeps reliability of the system, helps all of us, assists the customers in keeping cost containment issues in place. And I just think that everybody needs to come to the table knowing that there is a give, and they need to know what that is when they enter the room so that we can come to a solution together. Thank you.
FERC, Commissioner Allison Clements.
Thank you, Chair Stanek, and thank you, Chairman Glick, for setting up this meeting and this effort. It's exciting to hear these comments and to think maybe there's a way to make progress and make this not just be statements. So I'm appreciative of the chance to participate. Thanks to Liz Salerno, too, for setting up and doing a lot of the work on behalf of FERC staff to support us being here. And I'll also thank Chair Scripps for starting off with a Wayne Gretzky quote, because, what kind of day can't be made better by a Wayne Gretzky quote? So we are at an inflection point in the electric sector. We have, with lots of exceptions to prove the rule, a system that is outdated in its approach and its intent, that is aging in its state, and that is increasingly insufficient to serve customers reliably. And all of us around the table and our colleagues around the country have a weighty responsibility to do our part relevant to our statutory obligations to ensure that going forward, whatever is happening in the world, to the best of our ability, we're able to try and protect customers, ensure reliability. And I think it's worth noting that when we start this partnership, this is one part of the transmission puzzle. A lot of things have to go right to succeed in getting that right balance and finding that right amount of investment that our system needs to continue to support what Senator Manchin has called our super economy. And there are a lot of people who are not in the room today who have a lot invested in that, and that includes sovereign nations across our land. It includes lots of different kinds of stakeholders who will care a lot about how this gets done, how expensive it is, how it gets cited, and it's just important to acknowledge that whatever we are able to get together on in this process, it has to feed into that reality. That'll be outside this series of hotel rooms that we'll have the chance to be together in. Certainly the path isn't easy, but I do want to thank NARUC members and this task force, one, for putting, as Chair Stanek said earlier, rolling up your sleeves and putting forward productive suggestions and comments. That's a really good starting point. It's not a set of generalized statements from which we're kind of left guessing, where at least portions of the group have alignment. And also for, I thought, CREPC, and I know it's been happening in other regions, you all getting that input from your colleagues. That's really important, and it's exciting for me to see as an observer of these processes for some time. So in the spirit of that collaboration, I just want to put forth a couple of the questions that come to mind for me as we all slowly but surely start weaving our way through this docket, this really robust record in our docket. So the first one is, how can FERC respect state and regional differences while at the same time move at the pace required to get to this investment in a way that actually serves customers? You know, that theme is loud and clear at this table and in your comments. Also, all experience suggests that we have to move with haste towards finding ways to make a cost-effective investment. Second, what processes do we need as a commission to ensure the opportunities for states to participate in the planning process in a way that doesn't overburden states, but still ensures there's opportunity, that on the front end, is there an opportunity to weigh in on a siting approach? Is there an opportunity that's realistic for states to have their own process for non-wired alternatives that can flow into a myriad of different regional planning processing timelines around the country? Is the transparency that you might need to do all of those things sufficient in the planning processes that are FERC jurisdictional? And then third and finally, how do we effectuate that shared interest in making sure that this generational transmission build-out is cost-effective? And that means a lot of things. It means, how is the projects that get chosen in these processes competitive and cost-effective? How is the way that these projects get built ensured that we have no check at all? How do we think about benefits in a world where we do respect lots of states' different policies, and also acknowledge that there's a need for a robust conversation around the system upgrades that every customer in all 50 states needs to ensure prosperity going forward? And so those are some of the initial thoughts on my mind as we go into this, and I'm really glad we're here today and starting this conversation. Thanks.
Chairman Ted Thomas of the Arkansas Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Stanek, Chairman Glick, and to all those that provided the logistics to make this thing happen, including those who got me fed pizza for lunch. I got my first taste of the RTO world as a PSC staffer working on SPP governing documents. Then as a commissioner, I've served on OMS, the Organization of MISO States. In January of 2021, OMS traded me and a player to be named later to the SPP RSC for Commissioner Kim O'Gwen, who is in the audience. So my current role is RSC member for my state. Arkansas customers have received significant benefits from participating in RTO markets in both of those markets. Of course, we earned those benefits by spending countless hours in RTO stakeholder meetings, talking about transmission planning and cost allocation and all of these topics that we're going to study in detail today. And as the task force develops. And I hope to be able to bring to bear the experience of studying these issues as we face new challenges and have new expectations about what can be achieved by prudent investment in the bulk transmission system. I look forward to the conversation, and thank you.
Commissioner Riley Allen of the Vermont Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, Chair Glick and Chair Stanek. I wanted to also just extend thanks to the entire commission for their work in putting the ANOPR together. Obviously, I'm very pleased that we formed this task force, but the ANOPR, I think, is just pivotal, and it comes at a critical time, so I do thank you for that. I did want to give you a little bit of context before I kind of try to drive home a few points. First, I'm a new commissioner in the state of Vermont. I'm about 6 months into my term, but preceding that, I had 32 or 33 years of work for states and supporting state commissions in many different facets, including some of the issues that we'll be talking about, including challenges around state-level issues as it relates to transmission. I see things through the lens of a consumer advocate, if you will. I've been on the consumer side of the regulatory apparatus at the state level for the better part of my career. My background is, my educational background is as an economist. I also kind of bring with me the lens of looking at cost inefficiencies in the process. But my focus is, I'll get to the focus, but I just wanted to also say that like my colleague from Massachusetts, our region has very high energy costs, and that's a persistent issue and a concern for us. The state does have an ambitious kind of policy agenda. These days, I would say that we're more inwardly focused as we confront that policy agenda. I wouldn't say it's for a lack of transmission, but I think the situation broadly has caused us to be looking inward, and we have so much, frankly, solar generation in the state that we are solar and other renewables in the state that we do actually confront real problems. And I'll just mention again that the John Oliver video that mentions Vermont in that context. So my sensibilities and background kind of drive me in certain directions as I think about what are the gets, what is it that we're going after. I think it's very important to me that the issue of cost containment is front and center. We have to look at costs. I don't mean the short-term lowest cost solutions. I do mean creating a more holistic frame around the challenges. I appreciate very much the direction that the ANOPR seems to be leading us toward consideration of multi-values, creating opportunities for co-optimization, increasing the dimension of time as we consider these challenges. They all play to the issues that I think Vermont and our region broadly sees as important. I also think that the issue of interregional opportunities for transmission stands out to me as something that has been and can be revealed into the future, and I would like to give some attention to those opportunities going forward. From our perspective, regional flexibility, as we make progress, I think there are certain regions that are both in very different circumstances and at different stages of kind of moving forward. I think the Commission is well aware of that. I've heard Chair Glick refer to that at numerous times. I appreciate the sensitivity. I think it's important that the process that we unfold not slow down the movement forward in the states and regions that are making steady progress. And I'll just second the comments from my colleague from Massachusetts around the strong role for the states going forward. And I think that was also reflected in Commissioner Clemens' comments. Getting that balance right is just critically important. Thank you.
For Commissioner Mark Christie.
Well, thank you. The acoustics in here are weird, aren't they? Let me first thank Chairman Rich Glick for setting up this joint task force. I think this is the first time that there's been a formal FERC, NARUC task force in the electric regulation area. I may be wrong, but I think that's the first time. People in NARUC remember there used to be the joint task force with the Federal Communications Commission, and one of them was the Separations Committee, and if you ever sat through that, you never fully recovered from the experience. But this is a great idea, Rich, great idea, and I'm glad that we have this joint task force. This morning at the morning session, Chairman Ted Thomas of Arkansas said this is not the ANOPR task force, but it does come first, so let's talk about the ANOPR. And I want to compliment NARUC again for turning in a really excellent comment. I read every word of it, took my yellow highlighter out, did a lot of yellow highlighting. NARUC, you all turned in a great comment. I'm going to talk about some highlights here in a second. And many states turned in comment in the ANOPR. It wasn't just NARUC. There were numerous states, California, Kansas, North Carolina, Kim, great comment, Idaho. A lot of states turned in great comment, and I spent a lot of time reading that. So thank you to all the states that turned in comment on the ANOPR. It's very informative. You really are helping inform what we end up doing on the ANOPR. And I also want to send a shout out to NASUCA, the National Association of State Consumer Advocates. So those of us who've been at state regulators know how important NASUCA is, and those consumer advocates in every state are great. And so I always pay attention to what NASUCA has to say. In the NARUC comment, let me just mention specifically, there are a few things that came through in the NARUC comment very strong. One was siting and permitting is the state primary responsibility, and I fully agree with that. That is for the states, siting and permitting. Another thing that came through, Chris Raper just mentioned it, Commissioner Raper of Idaho, reliability has to be the primary priority as we go through this ANOPR process, and controlling cost to consumers, and that's another priority. And another thing that came through, not just in the NARUC comment, but in several of the state comments, Maryland Energy Administration, Chairman Stanek put in a very good comment on this regard. States need to play a much bigger role in the transmission planning process. Had a great conversation again with Ted Thomas this morning, getting more detail about SPP and their regional state committee and how the regional state committee works. And I would just suggest, and I think this came through the NARUC comment and several of the individual state comments, to the extent this task force can really move the ball on elaborating a better, bigger role for the states in the transmission planning, I think would be a really salutary goal for this, and I think something this joint task force is really uniquely suited to do, because we have all the state regulators here and people like Ted who can tell us in great detail how the RSC works, which I think is a really great place to start. And it's different in all the RTOs, as you know. So all those came through in the various comment. NARUC, your comment had really great suggestions on queue reform. We all know queue reform is needed. We all know we've got backlogs in all the RTOs. We have backlogs in the non-RTOs. And so NARUC had several very specific recommendations on queue reform. I commend them to everyone to take a look at those. That's a very constructive thing that NARUC you put forth. And let me mention something else about queue reform. Some of the states that are not in RTOs are already doing it. I recommend look at North Carolina's comment. The North Carolina Utility Commission comment talks about how North Carolina and South Carolina did queue reform on their own. They're non-RTO states. they did it on their own, and I'm glad to say we at FERC approved it. Thank God we did. And so the non-RTO states can move on queue reform right now. And I know some of the RTOs. PJM is moving, has got a task force working on queue reform. SPP has done some things on queue reform. So that's the kind of thing, and you have great recommendations in the NARUC comment. Another thing I want to mention, okay, let's get to cost allocation, which is always the easy one, right? NARUC had several really important comments on cost allocation. If you get NARUC to agree on anything on cost, it's really a miracle, but there were several comments in the NARUC cost allocation. First, keep the Order 1000 principles of cost allocation. That was explicit in the NARUC comment. Secondly, NARUC said costs must be commensurate with benefits, and benefits must be specific and real, not general and speculative. And that was explicit in the NARUC comment. The NARUC comment said costs of public policy projects should not be involuntarily forced on consumers in other states. That tracked what Pennsylvania said and what Chair Brown-Dutrell was mentioning earlier today. And involuntary is the key. Voluntary can be done. And FERC, if you might recall, last June, we issued a statement at FERC saying voluntary cost allocation agreements among states are fine. There's nothing in any of the FERC Order 1000, 2003, you name it, there's nothing in those orders that stops any multiple of states from voluntarily, keyword, voluntarily agreeing to share costs of public policy projects. There is no barrier there. But keyword voluntary. Another thing in the NARUC comment, also in NASUCA, keep participant funding, because that's only fair that the generator developers bear the cost, not consumers. That was in the NARUC comment. NASUCA very strong on that. So with that, I just want to thank NARUC and all the states who turned in comment, and I commend them to all of you. You've really added to the record and to giving us information on as we proceed on the ANOPR. And again, I think that this joint task force, I would just put the suggestion out there, I think a great thing this task force can do is really hone in on that theme that comes through all the state comments. States need to play a much bigger role in transmission planning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Finally, we will turn to Cliff Rechtschaffen, who is with the California Public Utilities Commission virtually. Hi, Cliff.
Thank you very much, Chair Stanek, and welcome everybody. I very much appreciate the ability to participate virtually. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm a commissioner on the California Public Utilities Commission. I'm the lead on our renewable portfolio standard and integrated resource planning processes, and been involved in other transmission and west-wide market integration issues on the West. I'm really delighted to have been selected as one of the two reps along with Chris Rapier, and I can't commend FERC strongly enough, as others have, for taking its partnership with the states so seriously and for giving us inside, indeed privileged spot at the table to work on these important efforts. We know, of course, the West is very unique. We pride ourselves on that. We're diverse. We're very independent. We're fragmented. We only have one organized wholesale market in California, as Commissioner Raper said. But in spite of this diversity, in spite of having 38 balancing authorities, there is a growing consensus in the West about how important transmission is. We need new transmission to meet the changing needs of our grid and our very strong decarbonization goals. Some of that is driven by the many states that have very ambitious clean energy policies, and others are driven by utility their own clean energy goals of utilities, which we have quite a number in the West. And there is a increasing recognition that transmission's critical for reliability in the West, especially as we grapple with the impacts of climate change. And those, of course, have hit the Western region with great force recently, with unprecedented regional heat storms, drought, and wildfires. And we strongly share these views in California, where we have very ambitious clean electricity goals, as well as a net carbon neutrality goal by 2045. We know we'll need significant transmission build out to reach those goals. And we know we'll have to start doing that sooner rather than later because of the urgency of dealing with climate change, and also because the grid is changing faster than anticipated. And all that underscores why the work of this task force is so welcome. I do want to point out that as in other regions, as in New England, we are internally in the West looking at how to have better cooperation regionally. That may occur through voluntary initiatives, that might occur through WEC, but there's a growing interest in this subject. I share the views of many others in the dialogue that the current planning process needs to improve to meet our changing grid, to better match with state goals, to look at future anticipated generation, and to incorporate broader definition of transmission benefits. I want to just set the stage for a minute and talk about how California is somewhat unique and differently positioned than many other RTOs and ISOs. In California, we do have a close match, a close fit between our resource planning efforts and the CAISO's transmission planning process. We have a memorandum of agreement that was signed about 10 years ago between the PUC and the CAISO. Under that memorandum, every year, the PUC provides to the CAISO our portfolio of future resources that we've modeled and determined are needed to meet the state's public policy and reliability needs. That then gets fed into the planning process. The CAISO then determines the transmission needed to meet this resource mix and identifies appropriate solutions. This includes consideration of generation not yet in the transmission queue. And then on our end, our siting and permitting function, we give substantial weight to any CAISO approved projects that are consistent with the portfolios. It's not a perfect model. I think it has worked well and can hopefully provide some lessons for other regions and also for FERC as we work through this process. We also, by the way, agree that it's important to have a longer term planning horizon. And just as an aside, we have been working with the CAISO recently on something they call a 20-year transmission outlook. That's a higher level look at long-term transmission needs in addition to the regular planning process. We just think that helps us evaluate what projects we need to approve now and over the longer term. I want to mention two other things that are priorities for California and I think for the West. We know we will need to increasingly rely on out-of-state resources to serve load as we move toward our deeper decarbonization goals. As a result, interregional planning is an important priority. We've had very few interregional projects in California. I think like other states in the West and elsewhere, we don't think the current process works particularly well. And while we do not support mandatory approaches, we do support principles and standards that could help enhance this project. Lastly, we are particularly concerned, as others have mentioned, about the rising cost of transmission. It is one of the biggest drivers for rate increases in California. We're very concerned about the impact on our ratepayers. They are facing very significant pressures from other sources as we have to deal with climate change right now. This includes billions of dollars in necessary wildfire mitigation costs. So we're really interested in ways to contain costs. One set of issues concerns competitive bidding, which we've done in California. The CAISO has done competitive bidding for a dozen projects and costs have come in lower than anticipated. This may take the form of other means that are discussed in the ANOPR. We're very, very interested in those, including potentially state committees, which could have a role in evaluating transmission bids and alternative solutions. I could go on. There's obviously a lot of meaty issues. We're delighted that FERC is leaning into them in such a major way. I think as Commissioner Christie said, it's really an unprecedented way. This is exactly the conversation that we need to be having right now And we need to move quickly on this, and I look forward to working collaboratively on the task force going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll turn back to Ms. Salerno. Oh, sorry. Ms. Murphy.
Thank you. Yes, so now we will turn to the discussion of the desired outcomes of this first meeting, and I'll turn it to Chair Glick for that.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And for those of you that are interested in catching your flights tonight, you have nothing to worry about. We're way ahead of schedule, so things are going well. I just wanted to just briefly mention the subject and turn it over to Chair Stanek after that. But, you know, the discussion that we just heard from the different commissioners was very helpful, and I think it outlines, you know, some of the key issues that I think this task force needs to address over time. One of them is transmission planning, which we're going to talk about today, cost allocation, participant funding, cost containment, very important. All these are very important issues that I think this task force is capable of addressing, and I think hopefully we'll address in a very significant manner. Today's subject, though, is transmission planning, and I'll just give you my personal views in that I think there are, a lot of the issues were mentioned today. There are significant problems with the planning process today. We made a lot of, Order 1000 made a lot of progress. We have regional transmission planning processes currently, but we didn't have them in some cases before. But in large part because of the change in the grid, the change in the expectations, and the demand that's being placed on the grid, both in terms of a resilience and reliability perspective, but also in terms of the changing generation mix. It requires a different approach, and it requires a different approach, I think, on certain issues we heard today, concerns about siloing, concerns about whether the transmission planning approach is sufficiently anticipatory. And are we engaging? Is the transmission planning processes are they sufficiently transparent? Are there sufficient participation by various stakeholders? And that, I think we're going to talk about that a lot today. Those are issues I think that we really need to improve upon and need to do it quickly too. I think Commissioner Clements pointed out, and really it is an urgent need here for action, whether it be at the FERC level or at the state level as well. And I think I think everyone recognizes that's here today. I did want to say that and recognize, and I think Commissioner Danley said this well, in that one of the reasons we're here today is because it's very important that we work together. It's also very important to recognize, and I think you all at the state level recognize this, that states have an incredibly important role to play here. That we can do all sorts of transmission planning, we could figure out a great cost allocation process, we can do everything else that needs to be done, check the box essentially, on all these issues that need to be addressed to move the transmission agenda forward. But in reality, that isn't going to lead to a lot of transmission being built. One of the reasons is because from a jurisdictional perspective, states primarily have siting authority, and that's obviously key to getting transmission built. But beyond that, I think we all know that even if you figure out from a FERC perspective that we significantly allocate costs associated with transmission or deal with some of the other issues that arise in the transmission development process, if the states don't support it, it's just not going forward. We see it time and time again. I think MISO, the MVP process, is a good example where the states got together and I think did a good job of moving those projects forward. But at the same time, if they hadn't gotten together, if there wasn't sufficient state support, we know what would have happened. Those projects would not have been built. So it's essential that I think that the states are involved and involved in a very substantial manner. I would say what I'm hoping to at least get out of this today is address. I'd like to hear several issues, some of which we've already addressed partially. One of which is what are the barriers to transmission planning? What needs to be changed? And again, some of that has been addressed in some of the comments today, but I think we need to delve into that further. Secondly, and this is very important from my perspective, but I bet you all of my colleagues at FERC, what do the states, what changes do the states need out of the transmission planning process? What is helpful from a policy perspective? What do you think really needs to be addressed if we consider reforms from the FERC perspective, from the FERC level, through our rulemaking process? And then finally, how can we best get the states involved? As I mentioned before, transparency and stakeholder involvement is very important. Are the states sufficiently involved now? And I realize that all these transmission planning processes that we're talking about, it's not generic. Some are better than others. Commissioner Christie mentioned some of those. But I'd like to hear from everybody is what's the best way what changes can FERC make to its transmission planning regulations that better involve the states, better encourage the states to participate, but also provide you all the information that you need to participate in a well-functioning manner. With that, I'll turn it over to Chair Stanek for his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that I could speak on behalf of all 10 members of the task force that we've been impressed with the level of not only engagement, but research in preparation for this meeting, as evidenced by Commissioner Christie's recitation of our comments. And so we thank you. We recognize that they were dense at 50 pages, but you had 160 comment submissions received, probably 10,000, maybe 20,000 pages in length. The public's not aware of this, but this drafting process for the Ann Arbor comments was an opportunity for our group of 10 to work for the first time together virtually. So this was sort of like a team cohesion homework assignment. And it wasn't easy. We solicited the input of not only our 10 states, but all NARUC memberships in order to find a consensus product that represented the states. And for those who read the comments, obviously the FERC commissioners and their staff have, it did make clear that there was a central case to be made for state participation in improving transmission planning, cost allocation, generator queue interconnection, and cost containment. So we did put a lot of time into those comments, and we're glad that each of you read them. Included in our pleading was support for long-term planning to evaluate transmission system needs and conditions, and to strive for that cost-effective development that you heard Chair Brown-Detrell mention just a moment ago. It's safe to say that there's interest on multiple fronts by state regulators, both at this table today and around the country. And while some of our interests do vary from state to state and region to region, one theme that resonates throughout our comments is that state involvement is critical to shape the development and the processes. And of course, so is the support and partnership of the 4 FERC commissioners here at this table. I don't intend to delve into our comments right now. The A-number was very broad. It asked dozens of questions, but it does provide a range of issues to support today's discussion. As Ted Thomas noted, this is what's before us now. This is what we'll address first. But it will help us find a way forward and focus and allow everybody to share their individual experiences, whether they represent a particular state or a particular region. Importantly, I would encourage everyone to ask questions so we could stimulate thoughts and learn from each other today. Like I said at the outset, I don't view this as a technical conference. Of course, this inaugural meeting will set the stage for future meetings over the course of the next few years, where we should be able to hone in on some of these key principles that we're working on, as well as to explore some other areas of alignment. Commissioner Christie, you noted the 9 principles in order, or 6 principles in Order 1000, I think 9 planning principles in Order 890. These principles were long debated, and it would be hard for us to come up with better principles than those. So no need to reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. But our goal here today, as we call ourselves the N10, is to set down a path of steady progress for meaningful transmission reform, whether or not those issues were addressed in the FERC ANOPR. But perhaps the most important achievement that I think, on behalf of all 10, that we could accomplish today is to develop a collegial partnership with the 4 of you through the clear exchange of ideas at this very table. So given FERC's order to pursue this task force, which we are appreciative of, and the demonstrated willingness of all of you to dedicate the time and resources to participate, I'm very confident that we could make some accomplishments, and I look forward to the remainder of today's discussions.
Thank you, Chair Stanek. We are ahead of schedule, but we are now going to take a 15-minute break.